Welcome back, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that little break we had. I'm really happy to present to you our next medical advisor speaker. I got the pleasure of spending some time with Dr. Warren this year. He is an endocrinologist at the Greenville, North Carolina Physicians East site. This is a multi-specialty group where he serves as Director of Clinical Trials and Director of Laboratory Services. And I was really excited to bring him here because he has participated in all of our clinical trials for hypopara. I thought he would be a great asset to be able to hear about the different things from a patient perspective and from a physician perspective. So please welcome Dr. Warren.
Thank you. When she asked me to speak, I said I would be glad to, but then I didn't realize I'd be following Dr. Kohlmeyer Crucifidis. It's a little harder show to follow. My disclosures, I receive support from Ascendis, Amulet, Calcilytics, and Takeda, and maybe MBX in the future. We'll see. As you said, I do clinical trials. I've done all the trials, the hypopara in the last 10 years, which is great because you get to learn about this community, and I think you have a great association here. So again, I was asked to talk about clinical trials. This is a pretty nebulous thing to talk about, and so I thought what I would do is, talk about what they are. Why do we have them? Why should you consider participating? And then how to participate. But first, I'm a little bit of a history buff, so if you'll indulge me a little bit, we'll go back a few years, back to 1796, when they were vaccinating against smallpox. Edward Jenner was vaccinating this boy. He doesn't look very excited about it, and of course, he was not giving much assent, and the parents were getting much consent either, but those were the days. And then the first randomized trial was ascribed to James Lind. He was a Scottish physician in Edinburgh. And after the first circumnavigation of the world, they lost about 1,400 sailors. After 2 years to go around the world, 1,400 sailors from scurvy. That's about half of this number of sailors. So imagine that. Go around the world, you lose half of your sailors from scurvy. And so they didn't really know how to treat it. There was some indication that perhaps ascorbic acid would be good. But so he did a clinical trial with 12 people. So he had 6 groups of 2 people. Some of them get barley water, some of them got some vinegar, some of them got rum. And then then a group got 2 oranges and a lemon. The trial ended after 5 days because this fruit was consumed. But nonetheless, by the next week, the two sailors who got the oranges and the lemon, their scurvy was cured, and they were able to go back to work. So after that, of course, so now we have every ship would have limes in their hold, and that's why we call sailors limeys. So fast forward now to the 20th century, and one of the most infamous trials of there was a Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in black men. This was a 40-year trial by the Public Health Service. They took 400 impoverished black men in Alabama and who had syphilis, and they wanted to see what's the natural history of syphilis. So it wasn't really recruiting. They weren't really told why they were in this study. They weren't really told anything except that they were getting treated for some disorder, and they weren't really told anything. And this trial went on for 40 years, and even after penicillin was discovered in 1947, these people were not treated. So after 40 years, one of the new scientists said, it sounds like a long time not to treat anybody. So he went to the director of public health and said, shouldn't we stop this trial? And they said, no, we shouldn't. We still want it to go on. Well, he leaked that to the press, and of course, the trial was shut down. And Of course, now that's why there's a lot of distrust about public in the black community about clinical trials. But this led to a big brouhaha and led to new laws and regulation to protect subject rights. And that's where we are today. Now we have something called the ICH, which is the International Council for Harmonization of Technical Requirements for Pharmaceuticals for Human Use, ICH. And that's basically the playbook we all go by. So all the pharmaceuticals are going to have the same guidelines. And in that publication, it specifically says that subject safety is responsibility of four groups. One is the principal investigator. That's the person at the site who has signed a form with the FDA, said they're responsible for everything goes on that site. So that would be me at my site for that particular study. So I am the principal investigator. He or she is ultimately responsible for the safety of that person. So if I see something's going on, or I have to break protocol, take them out, or whatever, the safety is ultimate. That's really the most important thing we're looking for. But also there's the institutional review boards. Institutional review boards they oversee these trials. They may be part of the institution, especially an academic institution. At a private practice, they're probably using a central institutional review board, but they're looking at the safety issues. And usually on the informed consent, you'll see that the institutional review board name will be on there. And if you have any concerns about your rights being violated, you can contact them directly. Also, the trial sponsor, meaning the pharmaceutical company, of course, it's their responsibility, and also the FDA. Of course, the FDA is going to look at point fingers down the line if there's a problem. But the FDA is really want to make sure that the drugs are not only effective, but safe. And I think that and they've done a really good job. I think we have a really good system now. So I think it's come a long ways from the Tuskegee days. And as a result of that experiment, 100 people died of syphilis, 100 of those men that started, and you had many wives who had it and several children who had neonatal syphilis. All right, so what is the purpose of a clinical trial? Well, it's to evaluate the safety and the efficacy of a medication or a device. So everything you have and all the prescription drugs you have or using has gone through the same process to get the approval by the FDA. You have to have this. The FDA mandates it to be able to market your medication or device. There are different phases, clinical trial phases, 1 through 4. Phase 1 is usually a very small trial, 20 to 80 patients, addressing the safety of the medication. And if that looks safe, they go to the next phase, looking at dose finding, look at the dose effectiveness. So again, a small trial, usually less than 100 patients, establishing preliminary safety and dose effectiveness. Now, once they do that, they say, well, it looks pretty good. Let's go to the next phase, and we'll enroll a much larger study. So it's a final confirmation of safety and efficacy, and that's required by the FDA for approval. Usually, those trials can be as many as tens of thousands, or it can be, depending on the disease state, 100 to 200 patients if it's a rare disease. And there's a phase 4, which is a post-FDA approval. So if you have a drug, you want to expand the indications for that drug, you may want to do a phase 4. You want to look at other properties of the drug, you can do a phase 4. So those are the 4 phases. Most of the time, most would be involved if you're going to be involved in studies, either phase 2 or 3. And I forgot to actually show, with a show of hands, how many people have participated in clinical trials? So a lot. Good. So hopefully this is nothing new for you. All right. So what kind of types of trials are there? There are observational studies. That's to help learn more about the natural history of condition. There's also randomized controlled trials when the investigational product is measured against an active comparator or a standard of care, like with hypopara. Since we don't have a active comparator available to us, the standard of care would be calcitriol and calcium, so that's the comparator. They're also classified by the purpose, either preventative, interventional, diagnostic, screening, genetic, quality of life, epidemiological, or expanded access or compassionate use. So why should you participate in a clinical trial? Well, you might want to learn a little bit more about your condition, perhaps. Maybe you want to help develop new medications and treatments for you and your posterity. Or I have a lot of folks that, I have some folks in calcilytics trial that doing it because their kids, to help their kids, with be a treatment available for them. Or you might want to do it because you have an early access to a new medication. So, for example, Ascendis has that available in an early access program. So it has to be, because it's not approved, it's part of it's still considered part of a clinical trial, and it goes through IRB approval, et cetera. So you should always have some concerns when you participate in a clinical trial. You should think about the side effects of the treatment, the time involved and travel required, often, and especially in rare disease states, you may have some travel because there are not but so many sites. And so there might be some travel involved. Now, usually your travel expenses will be reimbursed to you by the sponsor. There will be a small amount of stipend for your time, but not enough, obviously, to make up what you would have lost at work. But there is some traveling required in most studies. And also there is some responsibilities you have of taking the medication, doing what's required in the study, whether keeping a diary of your calcium intake, your symptoms, et cetera. So there is some things you have to do when you agree to do this. Also, it's a placebo versus investigational product, and for hypoparathyroid studies, there's usually a time when it's placebo control versus your versus calcitriol and calcium, and then you'll become an open label after that, which everyone gets the medication and the investigational product. And the nice thing about that, if you were in the NAPARA trials, you got it ongoing, and if you're in the Ascendis trial, you're getting that as well. So it allows you to get the medication for a long time, and sometimes before or until it's eventually approved, and sometimes beyond that. I know with NAPARA we had 5 or 6 years of therapy, so it allows you to do that. So, but there are concerns. Are you willing to do this? Of course, you don't know if you're getting placebo, but most of the time you'll know because you'll not be able to come off the calcium. But it is double blind, meaning blinded, so neither the site nor you will know what you're getting. All right, so how do you identify a trial? You can go to clinicaltrials.gov. You can search for a condition, whether interventional and recruiting, and it helps you identify that site so you make contact with that site. Also, if you go to the Hypoparathyroid Association site, there is a link to this as well, so it makes it a little bit easier for you. So this is a little screenshot that I did. I went in clinicaltrials.gov, I put in hypoparathyroidism, and I put in, I wanted USA, and I wanted the recruiting and not yet recruiting studies. I didn't want all the studies because it would be all the studies completed as well. So I put that in there, several came up. So you can do more filters, you can do it by state, you can do it by region, other things you can put in there. So in this case, you click on a study. This is the AMULET study, and I'll give you a little, I know you can't see this, but it gives you a study overview, what's the study about. And you can toggle down and scroll down and find what's involved in the study, what are the entry criteria for the study, what's involved. And you can also look at the sites that are included and see what's available to you near your region. So that allows you to find out what's going on. Again, you can easily get there from the Hypoparathyroid Association site. So what is the process? Well, if you're not part of the site, you're not getting your medical care from that site, we'll need to get your medical records. So you usually have to request that to review. And then there's something called an informed consent, which is the most important process of clinical trials. That means there's usually very thick, maybe 20 pages or so, discussing why you're doing the study, what the medication is, what are your obligations in the study, what are the potential side effects of the medication, and how often you have to come in. And usually I like to have this sent out before the person comes in, so they have plenty of time to read it and make notes, and so they can ask me questions. And we want to make sure that all your questions are answered before you sign this. So once that is signed by the participant and the principal investigator, then we can do our other things. We can't do anything. We can't ask you to do anything before that. Even can't even tell you to fast. We can't tell you anything. You just come in and we'll discuss it. Once you do the consent form, then we can do the next step. And don't worry about memorizing anything in there, because you will get a copy of the signed document. And I always think it's great because it cures any insomnia. You just read through it and you'll quickly go right to sleep. So keep it by your bedside. So then we can do some screening procedures, which often includes lab work, EKGs, medication, and medical history, directed physical exam. And then after they do that, we'll determine, get all that back to see if you would qualify for that particular study. And then you're brought back and you're randomized. And the way you randomize, we put the number of the patient in the computer, and it tells us what we're supposed to pick. And of course, it's blinded to us. We don't know what it is, but it's randomized, and then we get started with medication. You'll have follow-up appointments, and again, we get labs, etc. And finally, the trial will end, and usually might be a follow-up after that. Now, if you're doing studies for hypopara, there's a fair amount of lab work involved. Once you change the medication, you have to get a calcium level done. Often we can do that in a local lab for you, so that makes it a little bit easier, so you don't have to keep coming back and forth so often. So that's the process, and it's important that you understand what's involved, and it's fairly straightforward. So just to conclude, I think clinical trials are certainly necessary to ensure the safe and effective treatments, and I think in the U.S. we've certainly got that, and the rest of the world as well. They've followed suit. FDA does regulate the drug development process, and the subject's rights and safety are paramount, which of course I think is spot on. So I'll stop there and see if there are any questions.
Who has questions for Dr. Warren? Clinical trials.
Yes.
Is there any chance we can work with the FDA to get the entry requirements around the PTH trials changed? I don't think it's safe or appropriate to have us have to drop off of our PTH medications for 30 to 60 days prior to the start of the trials. I've gone looking on the clinicaltrials.gov, and not one of the insulin trials I've looked at of the first 25 asked diabetics to drop off of their insulin for a month.
Yes.
So why are we being asked to?
Well, the FDA is a strange and mysterious place.
Yeah. Mark, I actually have a comment about this. Yeah,
we
Mark,
got-
I actually have a comment about
Yes,
this.
please.
So about a year to 2 years ago, the FDA changed their requirements for rare disease and actually did make it unethical to actually have people come in off of drug. I just don't think that they pay attention to the hypopara world in the same way they've paid attention to other rare diseases and endocrine. So I would strongly, strongly suggest that the way you're going to get them to change their mind about that is you protest as a patient care organization, as an advocacy group, because that's how it got changed on the Cushing's groups and the acromegaly groups. That's how they get changed, because the FDA is a strange and opaque beast, one of which I simultaneously loathe and love. So for those reasons, because they don't change unless you make them change, and they don't really listen to us, and they definitely don't listen to pharma. They absolutely could care less what pharma has to say to them. But they do listen to patients, especially if you are strong in your resolution, and also many of you. So I would suggest that you plan to go when sponsors are going and plan to go when there's reviews, because that's the only time the committee is all together, Because if you go individually, the committee won't be there, and they need to hear from all of you, because the biostatisticians are the most non-humanoid people I've ever met. And so they need to see you en masse protesting this issue because of a safety concern, because you got to get the biostatisticians, and they're never going to be there unless there's an actual meeting. So it's not the doctors, it's the biostats people, because they just look at numbers. So I would suggest that you treat it like the other rare disease companies have treated it, which is basically get the patient advocacy groups in there to make that change demand, because it happened about a year or two ago for the rest of endocrine, and for whatever reason, it's not happening, and it's not the same committees, because it's not the same committees, yeah.
So Michelle has gotten us set up with the patient-focused drug development meeting with the FDA. So we'll be doing that on March 5th, and she'll tell you a little bit more about that tomorrow. What other questions?
Well, we have the table back here. That was great. I learned so much every time. 2 points. Since we're, a lot of us are doing the trials, I would say that except in hypoparathyroidism, there's a 30 to 40% placebo effect when you believe in it, but not in hypopara, right? 3% or less. It's just scary to have to take you off your active D and calcium when you might be on placebo in a trial. But the good thing is the safety, like you say, Mark, is so, you just go right back. You do what's best for you, not what the protocol says if you're not on PTH. I asked the same thing when I was asking the investigators, why do people have to be off for 3 months? But that's partly because of what happens in the bone and kidney. When you come off your PTH, it will be impossible to know what's going on if you're starting a new PTH when you've just come off that PTH. And so it wouldn't be an accurate trial. Now, I don't know about 3 months. We might be able to ask the people that decided that in the trials, because I was pleading for 2 weeks, but it's just not long enough. You need that time.
But it seems like instead of having them go cold turkey and go back to conventional treatment, oral treatment, you could do a transition period where you put them on the new medication for anywhere from 30 to 60 days before you start taking study data. And that would provide the same thing, because they don't do that with anything else. If you look at the rest of the trials that they have for life-sustaining medications, which this is one, they don't do that. They give you a transition period.
All right, question? Bob's coming to you.
I was in your study for NatPara, and they allowed, at first they were saying if you were on something else, when you got out of NatPara and you went into TransCon, which I'm in now, they waived that time frame for,
It just depends on the protocol, yeah.
yeah, because I was in at your study for
Right.
NatPara, and then TransCon said they
Right.
waived that.
Questions? Do we have questions online, Michelle? So the only other question I would ask is if somebody was wanting to get into the clinical trial, you mentioned they need medical records if they're not there. What kind, how long? What type of medical records do they need to bring? Is it just about hypopara, or is it about other things?
Mostly it's about the particular condition, and I just would like to know, having some records that said they've had it for at least a year, for example, that they've had a PTH level done in the last year or wherever, and just to confirm, because what will happen is if you get audited by the FDA, they're going to go and see, okay, where is the evidence that person qualified for the study? So you have to have that available. So I just need enough records for 1 or 2 years. Usually it's not hard to do now with electronic records. I can just quickly send it to you. So it's not that difficult. Now, if you're an Epic, sometimes we can get it that way. If your records are an Epic, we can sometimes do it that way. Other times we just have to get you to write for it. I'll just usually ask for 2 years worth of maybe the treating endocrinologist, perhaps. I don't need all the medical records, just enough so I can verify that you have this condition.
All right, very good. Dr. Colmar?
Thanks, Mark. Can you explain how important it is to try to have your thyroid stable? Because we know how hard that is if you're going to enter a trial. Because once you have your first screening day, you only have so long, and you'd think that that wouldn't be a problem, but we all know it is.
Well, particularly with the AMULET study you and I were participating in, you have to have the TSH in a certain range, and it can't be below 0.2 if you have thyroid cancer, and it's got to be within 10% of the lower limits of normal otherwise. And so if we know that if your TSH has been too low, we just need to change your dose perhaps, and it's got to be stable for 6 weeks. So that may delay things as well if your TSH isn't right. So once you're in the study, it doesn't matter, but they don't care so much. But it's part of the entry criteria. You may screen fail. That's a good point. That's been part of the hardest part of that particular study is getting the TSH right.
Okay, we have a question about, can you give an approximation of what kind of time commitment it is for these type of studies?
It depends on the study, of course. The calcilytics is not that difficult. Usually once a month or even twice a month or every 2 months, depending on what part of the study you're in. If you're doing a PTH study, it's going to be probably initially a monthly, sometimes maybe twice a month or the first month or two. But often we can make the adjustments and just see you once a month. After the beginning of the study, once you're on stable dose, those visits started getting less frequent. And what you have to do is look at when you look at the informed consent, it'll tell you that and give you more detail. It varies from study to study, but every study has initially you're going to have more frequent, maybe every 2 weeks sometimes, but it does get less frequent. Okay, thank you.